Yo, Gazman here. Firstly, just wanted to say, wow, thanks for that. That was unexpected. Secondly, this is going to be a bit of a different video. We're on location this time, so let me know if you want to see more or less of that sort of thing. We've got some more normal things lined up in the not-too-distant future, but in the meantime, our feature presentation.
You join me at the border of two states to talk about just one of them, Queensland, more specifically the Gold Coast. It is home to nightlife, exotica, and some of the best beaches in the world. It's an hour's drive away from a place where sport is synonymous with life, in a country where sports is life. 4 major sports teams live here. One's pretty good, the rest, not so much, and there are skeletons under the floors they limp across. The Gold Coast Sporting Graveyard is varied and unique, and today, we're going grave digging. The first sign that sports on the Gold Coast didn't have a big future was that the first team ever based here in this big old fishbowl behind me was named after the city down the road. The Brisbane Bears were a poor to average team who sat around here not really doing a whole lot before eventually moving to the city they were actually named after. And they didn't do that till 1993. Their parting gift to their, faithful, I guess, was getting battered by Geelong and allowing them to score 239 points on them in 1992. They would go on to find limited success in Brisbane before merging with Fitzroy and creating the greatest team of all time, somewhat ironically considering how these guys panned out. I hope you don't mind if I just read from the script here, but I've got a flight to catch in like an hour and I'm really hungover, so I'm doing this in the traditional Gold Coast fashion. Hot on the heels of the Brisbane Bears, the first true Gold Coast team was born right here, in New South Wales. Yep, that's right, Gollan Drive, Tweed Hills West, New South Wales, NSW. You couldn't make it up. They were the Gold Coast Tweed Giants, the red-headed stepchild that both families didn't want, but critically, they were the first team designed for the people of the Gold Coast and surrounding areas to actually compete in a professional sporting league. They would be one of many in the 90s to compete for attention in this region, and this is where things start to get a bit nuts.
Do try and keep up. The Gold Coast Clippers are born. They're a bad baseball team. They become the Daikyo Dolphins, a good baseball team. Then the Giants become the Seagulls. Then Daikyo pulls out and the Dolphins become the East Coast Cougars. They sucked, so they became the Gold Coast Cougars. Don't get them confused with the Gold Coast Cougars, who became the Gold Coast Rollers, who became defunct. The Seagulls become the Gladiators. They go bust. The Chargers are born. They suck, they die. The Cougars die as well, and that's sports on the Gold Coast in the 1990s.
It was an absolute minefield. Very little popularity, very little success, and absolutely no longevity. Out of all the teams to play in the Gold Coast in the 1990s, only one made it to the 2000s, and they had another team's city in the name. Even the legacies of these grounds haven't lasted. Here, at the birthplace of sport in the Gold Coast, technically, there's no sign really of its significance. By the time the Bears became the Lions in the AFL, the very stadium the Giants/Seagulls called home, the birthplace of professional sport in this region, was being pulled down. Gold Coast luck didn't get much better from there. The East Coast Aces and the Gold Coast Blaze were founded in 2007. The Aces were a rugby union team that played here at Metricon to very little interest and fanfare, and they were pretty much doomed from the start as the league they were in actually collapsed before they even got to play a game. And hey, what are you doing? Stop, why? Actually, fun fact about just how apathetic Queenslanders are to rugby union. When the Wallabies played here in Robina in 2014, they got their lowest crowd since World War I, sparking a boycott in the venue that lasted 7 years. The Blaze played at the Exhibition Centre, but because all the sports stadiums in the Gold Coast are so fucking far away from each other, let's pretend they played... yeah, this will do. They were an almost exactly average basketball team under the superb guidance of Joey Wright, but financial troubles unfortunately crippled them. So then Gold Coast United were founded by old mate Fatty McFuckhead. They popped up in the A-League like a genital wart and got decimated. They made some really weird moves that ended up costing Mr. McFuckhead over $16 million, and they include enforcing a tiny crowd cap, promoting a teenager to captain, sacking the coach for not liking that insane decision, and making his players wear the infamous freedom of speech jersey. And unsurprisingly, neither of those three teams lasted past the 2012 season. I guess the minds were right. Next up came the Gold Coast Blue Tongues, an ice hockey team. Yes, an ice hockey team in Australia's tropical paradise. That was a thing that actually happened, and they played here in this home hardware store looking building in Boondall. Not Bundall, but Boondall. They used to be in Bundall, but now they're in Boondall, don't get confused, in Gold Coast's outer ring. They had matches called off due to the surface being unplayable, not my words, before they were kicked out. They scoured the facilities in the Gold Coast for about 2 years before their license expired, meaning that their ice hockey dream could never really catch on. They spent a few seasons kicking around with not exactly terrible results, but they never made the playoffs. But still, that small amount of achievement saves them from at least being one of the most embarrassing sides the Gold Coast has to offer.
So, no doubt wondering why some weird kid was filming with a phone camera mounted on top of a suitcase, the owner of Iceland actually came out and had a little chat about the Blue Tongues. He explained why he had to evict the Blue Tongues, and he's a really nice fellow and runs a very fantastic facility. If you're in the area, I'd recommend. Check it out. Generally, there's always been one exception to the Gold Coast curse. Somewhat uniquely, Queensland has always been a gold spot for motorsport. In a way, it was Genesis. Dick Johnson Racing were initially based in the Gold Coast and are, by a significant margin, the single most successful Gold Coast sporting team. They've won tons of races and multiple championships across their 50 years, winning titles as recently as 2020. But even they aren't immune to the curse. There was the Rock incident, of course. That was one of 3 distinct times the organisation could have plunged into administration. They got beaten by a crashed out car at Bathurst one time. They had several super long wind droughts, and worst of all, they raced with a lineup of Tim Blanchard and Johnny Reed. Ugh. And they were the only success story. Triple F and Paul Morris Motorsport couldn't have been more different fundamentally, but both didn't last long in the main game. Stone Brothers and Techno have had success, but again, their time on the Queensland coast was fleeting. Those two now live on under new names, in new places, and are becoming shadows of their former selves.
So who are the survivors? Who's actually lived through the curse? Who occupies the hearts and minds of the modern Gold Coast sports fan in 2022? Well, there's only 4 teams flying the flag for this reasonably good city. The first is Dick Johnson Racing, by far the oldest, but they've just lost their star driver and their muddy-laden American backing. The second, Matt Stone Racing, is going alright. They're not setting the world on fire, but they're a shadow of a shadow of a shadow, really. And the other 2, oh boy, are they in trouble. It really says a lot about Gold Coast sport that the Titans are in the better position of the 2. Founded in 2007 and playing at the frankly remarkable Cbus Super Stadium, they were bad. Then they got good, and then they really, really got bad. They never got back up, or at least not under their own steam. In 2015, it was discovered that the Titans were drowning in debt, so much so that the NRL had to buy them and bail them out. For one sad, cruel moment, it looked like the Titans too would be granted admission into the Gold Coast sporting graveyard. Instead, they lived, but it turns out that could have been an even crueler fate. You see, their new star signing, Daly Cherry Evans, demanded a massive, massive salary that all of a sudden the Titans couldn't pay. So they had to get rid of him before he'd even played a game. They managed to scrape together a team of cost-effective youngsters and even made it into the finals before the kings of their domain remind them of where they belonged. They got knocked down, and to this day, they haven't really gotten back up again. But hey, at least they made it to the finals. At least they've challenged for something noteworthy. At least they've played in games that had some significance. They haven't completely embarrassed themselves. So yes, finally we get to these guys. Honestly, these clowns are worthy of their own video, but here's the Cliff Notes version. One of two expansion teams in the markets that were lukewarm at best towards Aussie rules, the Suns began life in 2009. They played in a couple of the competitions that no one cares about to prepare for an AFL entry in 2011. They did well in the Junior League but got trounced by an AFL second-tier teams in the next season. Not really a great sign, but let's keep reading on. No, that's really all they've done. Cool. I figured I'd put as much effort into reading this as the Suns have put into actually winning games over the last 10 years. They got a ridiculous amount of draft concessions though, but even despite that, their first ever matchday lineup in the AFL contained this bloke. Yeah. He and to a lesser extent GWS recruit Israel Folau were symbolic of what the new expansion clubs represented in terms of their recruiting. They didn't know what AFL fans wanted. They didn't really have any around here to start. Oh wait, they like rugby, right? So they hire some rugby stars with absolutely no football background whatsoever. It was farcical. Hunt's experiment was largely a failure, aside from the weirdest after the siren winning goal you'll ever see. But how did the rest of those first year picks go? Oh dear. But that's the rookie draft. It's always a lottery. Surely their first national draft was more of a success? And actually, it was. Some of them even went on to have long careers at the Gold Coast, and a few of them went on to win premierships. It's just a shame that those premierships weren't for the Gold Coast Suns.
The player exodus was ridiculous. Let's bring up each of their first round draft picks since 2010. You would expect that in 2021 most of them would have been retained. Not the case. After 2010's crop, only Leslie, Fiorini and Ainsworth have held on longer than 5 years. Obviously since then the retention has been better. But that hasn't masked the fact that of their team of the decade, made when most of these players were still active, under half of them still wore red and gold. Compare that to fellow expansion club GWS. Yes, it's true that GWS got better concessions and happened to get them during one of the best drafts of all time. But they also got something that the Gold Coast didn't: how to develop players. GWS selected old players on the verge of retirement, club legends, premiership winners, club best and fairests, and used them as mentors. Some went on to even become coaches. And this was all under the guidance of a Hall of Fame coach with a proper succession plan already in place.
And while they got rid of these talented youngsters, the Suns hoovered up a bunch of guys who were talented on paper but never really actually applied it. They didn't really care about controversy or attitude at the time, and they got the best player in the league in by using his brother as bait. And how is Nathan Ablett going? That felt really bad. They punched each other at training. Most of the initial recruits went on to leave completely after the first 5 years, and all of this was under the guidance of an idiot, then a useful idiot, and then a refrigerator legs.
And Stewie Dew really is a perfect metaphor for them. The coach, like his club has done for a decade, pisses everything up a wall. I'll put it like this. These are the all-time win percentages of all VFL-AFL teams. University literally got killed off in World War I, so discount them. And look at who's last. By a long way. The Suns only moved above the Brisbane Bears once. They were at 333 for 7 days, over 10 years ago. But they were playing out of the Gabba. Their home ground actually wasn't ready for its first game until 2 weeks later. By then, the Suns had a win percentage of 286. They would drop, then rise, then match that 286 figure exactly at home in game 84. After that match, they won 1 of their next 16 and have never come close since. The only time they were above the Bears was when they called Brisbane home. And remember where the Bears used to play? Yep, that's right. The only ever Gold Coast team isn't even the best team to be based in the Gold Coast.
And as for Greater Western Sydney, well, let me get into New South Wales to talk about them. There we go. Yes, they took a whole 109 games to draw level with the Brisbane Bears, but once they got past them, they never looked back. And as for the expansion teams of the 1990s, well, forget about it. Man, even just standing here on this side of the board makes me feel more like a winner.
They're not even the first or the best Gold Coast Suns. There was a semi-pro baseball team in America that played in 1989, and despite having a superstar play for them, folded after a year. Probably what the Australian Suns should have done. Even then, this baseball team had almost double the win rate of their Australian namesake. But what interests me about them is this number: the batting average of their 47-year-old shortstop. It's a decent average for a good player, and exceptional for an old man playing at, generally, the second worst position for hitters. And, for over 10 years, it's a mark that Gold Coast's win percentage has been almost magnetically drawn to. But why does this happen? Why is an area laden with money, where every team wants to go on an end-of-season trip, so cursed? How can an area that holds so many great events not be able to host a great sporting team? Sure, it's a great place to visit for a week, but you try dealing with noisy tourists, apartment living, and humid temperatures all the time. It's not for everyone. It's also way the hell away from Melbourne and Sydney, which can be tough for some players. And good luck bringing guys from Adelaide or Perth all the way across the country in an age of homesickness.
Another reason for Gold Coast's malaise is just apathy and bad infrastructure. Sure, Gold Coast may have a wild party boy reputation, but that's just a tiny fraction of what this city is. Everyone who actually lives here lives out in Ashmore and Robina, and they're areas where you really can't get anywhere without a car. Public transport around here is very meh. The stadiums aren't in the middle of or even close to the actual city centres like Sydney, Adelaide and Melbourne. In fact, if you look around, there's absolutely fucking nothing here, apart from the Factory of Sadness itself. Who the hell would want to come here? It's a really uninviting spectacle being here, and that's even if the team doesn't completely gargle gonads. Like, Jesus, I spent an hour trying to just get here from the airport just to film, 5 minutes of footage for what's ostensibly a passion project which 20 people are going to watch. So how do you expect residents to take hours out of their precious weekends to come and watch crap teams that they don't even really care about in the first place? And economically, at least, there's a tiny bit of a crisis going on here. Even though Gold Coast hosted the 2018 Commonwealth Games, with the main venues being here, sorry, I forgot to film this bit earlier. Oh god, no, definitely not here. There were other venues upgraded or built from scratch that no professional team is pouring money into by playing in it. And this is the big one, the Gold Coast Sports and Leisure Centre, built only 4 years ago. I've played in it, and it is a magnificent 5,000 seat facility. It's brilliant. But there's one problem with it. No one's using it. There's only so many amateur and semi-pro events you can host here. Yes, it is being used by the local Sadness factory next door, but that's really only for admin and indoor training purposes. You gotta fill the thing. Come on, lads.
Which brings us to the final point: mismanagement. Every league has tried to turn away from these issues so hard they're snapping their own necks. They've thrown money and resources at clubs that are either unfit or unable to run themselves. The cynics in the system see the writing on the wall before it's even constructed, and so only the very brave, the very naive, or the very desperate take on positions that, let's face it, most of them aren't good enough to perform in such an environment. And it's a cycle. It's a loop. These things feed back on themselves, creating more fuel to put on a fire that is ever burning. I'd say it's like building an ice rink in hell, but as you can see, it's already been done. They already did that. The never-ending failure isn't the most amazing thing. Really, the most amazing thing is that we're surprised at all. And remember how in the early days where every single Gold Coast team had to hyphenate their name and that led to some sort of identity crisis? Well, Galaxy FC found a way around that. Just take the Gold Coast out entirely. Well, I mean, technically what they did was just amalgamate all the teams in the region and then combine them into the best possible facilities they could find, but same diff. And even though they have the slight distraction in playing next to the least successful team in probably professional Australian sports, Galaxy FC are the most successful team to have ever had residents on the Gold Coast percentage-wise.
For all its failures at the professional level, the amateur and semi-pro sports scenes on the Gold Coast are still thriving. At the semi-pro level, the Coolangatta Tweed Blues continue the Gold Coast traditions of indecisive naming and a general lack of success, but at a lower price tag. But who cares if people don't actually want to come and see the sports, as long as people around here actually want to come and play the damn things. Plus, their ground, Len Peak Oval, is perhaps the only ground in Australia where you can legitimately claim to have kicked the ball so hard it goes into a different state, which is certainly more interesting than anything their AFL superiors have done over the last 10 years. Even here, at the gravesite of the first Warriors to go to bat for this region, the semi-pro spirit still shines through. The Seagulls still live, in a way, about half a K that way as the crow, or as the seagull, flies. Of course, because this region is a hellish wetland that shouldn't exist, it takes half a sodding hour to get there via Uber, and that's a $20 Uber that's worth more than the Seagulls' time in the NRL ever was. But with fewer overheads due to not having to be fully professional, they actually kind of thrive now. They've won a premiership. Yes, true, it's just one, but that's still one more than every other Gold Coast professional sporting team combined. No, what I meant is that this is the perfect place to just come to a sports tourney for a weekend. To just run around a big field with your mates and then get blackout drunk to celebrate. For all its failings at the highest level, for all the talk of it being the sporting graveyard of Australia, the Gold Coast, it has something special about it. The Gold Coast can only really thrive when it allows its sporting teams to just simply have fun, to revel in the purity of what sport is, to revel in the luxuries and facilities it has to offer. This place has an expressive personality that overwhelms everyone who comes here. And the moment you try and control that, try and harness it, well then you've lost before you've even hit the field. When you become too serious about it, when you professionalize it, then you lose everything that the Gold Coast has to offer. And that's the way it always will be, for better or for worse. Thank God, we're done.